Oh my gosh, it's been too long since we did a King of Our Nightmares episode. Um, so you're going to get three of them in one special live stream event. Because we were just going to do the stand tonight, but the thing is, I'm not going to have the time to stream this coming month, really. And this is so late. I mean, we finished reading the stand. Oh, it's now recording.
It already says it's recording for me since like 40 seconds.
Okay, we're already having issues. It's uh anyway. Okay, so we were supposed to record the stand I think in November. I think it was we were supposed to do all these by November. I didn't even read The Dead Zone until this year. I read The Long Walk. I think I had finished it right before I went and visited you. But this has been a long time in the making, and we're just going to do it. So we're going to take breaks throughout this and talk to y'all, but we're going to start each episode off like it's a new episode of King of Our Nightmares, but it won't actually be. So this is a special edition version of this. This is just so we can get all of this done. We can finish season 1 that's taken almost 2 years to make. And we can take a little hiatus and come back in a couple months and deal with this.
Yeah. And then we get to the 1980s Stephen King books.
Yes. So
that's a lot to cover.
Yeah. So anyway, hello everyone. Welcome to King of Our Nightmares. This episode, we're continuing with the Stephen King library as opposed to the Bachman library with The Stand. You didn't grab your copy that I gave you.
Sorry, you gave me this awesome hardcover, like the one you are showing off here.
Yeah, they're the same. They're the book club edition of the cut version of The Stand, because we're going to be talking about, well, I'm going to be talking about the cut and uncut versions. Noah's never read the cut version, and I had never read the uncut version until this recording. Because the cut version is very hard to find now. Basically, Stephen King was just becoming a popular author, like really popular, when he wrote The Stand. The publishing company, specifically their accounting department, didn't want the book to be more than $12. So they said, cut out 400 pages of the book. And they're like, you can do it or we'll do it. And he said, well, I'm going to do it. So he cut out a bunch of it. He actually cut out 500 pages. I just watched an interview on this. And then he added 400 back in 1990 for the complete uncut version. It's not complete. There's certain things that just didn't make sense in the book that he just never added back in. And he modernizes it, because the original versions, the plague happens in the 80s as opposed to the uncut versions, the 90s. So pop culture references are updated for that.
Most famously, like you told me, what I was gonna look out for, a mention of the Nightmare on Elm Street sequels, which yes is in there.
Also, because they make a joke about AC/DC's Who Made Who, which was for soundtrack for Maximum Overdrive, the only Stephen King film Stephen King directed. Also known as Cocaine the Movie.
But what's interesting about this, I swear, in his like little foreword for the re-release, he mentions like, oh, I just inserted stuff back in. I didn't change too much, but that's more or less a lie.
I think it just over time he didn't realize how much he changed. Because in an interview, he took 3 versions of The Stand that he had written and he pieced them together. But it wouldn't, let's be real, it wouldn't make sense to put it in the year 1990 and not have 80s references to things. So the big plot of The Stand is that a flu called Captain Trips, nicknamed Captain Trips, spreads across the world, kills most of the population, and it is his big tale of good versus evil. It's his one of his most biblical books.
Mhm.
Very much shows his Christianity, although I don't think he was a Christian at the time he wrote it. But Mother Abigail is this old black woman in, I can't even remember what state she's in, but she is the representation of good and who all the people will flock to. And Randall Flagg, the walking dude, the dark man, is the embodiment of evil. May or may not be Satan in this. It's hard to, if he's not Satan, then he's in the employ of Satan.
That's more or less what they say in the book. He's basically like an agent of the devil, or like the second in command, so to speak.
Yeah. And we have a whole bunch of characters.
The most characters yet, definitely.
I think his most characters ever in one of his books that are main characters.
Possibly. I'm
The
thinking
only
stuff like Under the Dome also has a lot of
Oh
characters
yeah,
going on.
I forgot about Under the Dome. Yeah, that's a lot too. But I mean, we're in the second half of the book. They're introducing new main characters.
True.
So this book is broken up into 3 parts. You got the first part, which is the flu. You got the second part, which is everyone all over America's meeting one another. And the third part is just the final, I'll just call it the final sacrifice and the final confrontation with Flagg. The first part is really good. I think we both can agree on that. The second part has good moments, but kind of doesn't work. And the third part also has good moments, but drags.
Yeah. Because this is a controversial opinion, I guess, because this is one of the most beloved King books.
Yes.
But for me, it was always a thing of like, I don't really get it. Like when I first read it, it's like the first part, absolutely great. And then it's just, this is one of the King books, I would say the criticism of his books being too long, I would actually agree with.
This is where I think that comes from for his not fans. I will say this is his best character work aside from the Dark Tower. Dark Tower is a little different because there's so many of the books. But this is his best character work for a single book. Everyone has their time to shine in The Stand. Everyone. Even Tom Cullen, the greatest character ever, has his time to shine. I love Tom Cullen. He's my favorite. Do you have a favorite in the Stand? I know it's not Franny. You can't stand Franny. I don't mind her, but
I mean, I like Nick, the mute guy.
I like Nick too. I like Nick and Tom.
Yeah.
As a pair, I think that's fun stuff. With that. I like Stu. He's sort of the everyman. I really like Flagg.
Oh yeah, if this book, while I don't love it, it introduced a lot of like great stuff, like Randall Flagg. Like he is a great villain, obviously.
Yeah, I mean he shows up in other things. I mean, I like just about everyone. The one person I don't like is Nadine Cross. Even when you're supposed to kind of feel bad for her, I never did. I love Larry. I love Larry's character arc. And that's one thing I will say about the uncut. Well, we should probably explain who these characters are. Franny Goldsmith is one of our first characters we're introduced to. She is in college and finds out she's pregnant and decides to keep the baby. which in the uncut version, you find out that her mom disapproves of it, but that's cut out of the original version, which I think is a bad cut. You've got Stu Redman, he's from, Franny's from Maine, Ogunquit, Maine. Also Harold Lauder is another character. They're the two that survive in Ogunquit, which Ogunquit is not a real town. Some of the towns that people are in are real, and some of them are made up. Stu Redman is the only one to survive in a town in Texas. He's actually taken into with the CDC because, we find out in the uncut version, dude escaped an army base that the Captain Trips was spilled in, and he ran away with his family. In the cut version, he just shows up dead.
That's insane. Like, I didn't know this before. Like, that was cut, because I always assumed that was in there. Like, it's in the movie.
Oh, most of the military stuff isn't in the cut version. That was all new to me.
Okay, so does this work better? Like, if it comes from the unknown, this virus,
it's creepier. It adds it's okay. I describe it like this. Have you ever seen the special edition version of Aliens that adds in all the scenes with the colonists and stuff? And like Newt's dad gets the face hugger on him and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, that's not in the theatrical version. And in the theatrical version, you don't realize how many Xenos there are until the Marines go into the bunker and they just start crawling everywhere, and it's terrifying. So certain things are creepier, but there's certain things like Larry uses a lot of Larry's character development in the first third of the book is gone.
No, that's a shame.
Yeah.
He's probably the best character in this in terms of like his arc.
Yeah. His sort of redemption. Like a lot of the stuff with his mom isn't in the cut version. I read 2 of these in a row, so I get things a little mixed up. So Larry is in New York. He has a hit single called "Baby, Can't You Dig Your Man?" because he's a righteous man, and they sing it all the time in this book. This is where I get the complaints that people say Stephen King's repetitive.
Yep,
that's very apparent in The Stand. So you got Larry's in New York. Stu's in Texas, although he ends up on the East Coast because the CDC moves him there when all of the people he knows from his small town die, and they're trying to figure out why he's still alive. We've got Nick, who is deaf and mute, and he gets beaten up. He's just drifting. He gets beaten up by these thugs, and the sheriff takes him in. And then you have Tom Cullen, who's just wandering around his town. He's disabled. He's severely, like, autistic, and has just been wandering around when everyone goes.
This reminds me, is Tom Cullen the first of this like special needs persons that King has, who has like supernatural powers? Because that becomes a trope.
Obviously. Yes, he's the first.
All right.
He's the first. We got Trash Can Man throwing some antagonists in, which most of Trash Can Man's story is cut.
That's a shame because he's probably the most fun.
Oh, he's so crazy. He's a literal pyromaniac. He just burns down like an entire state because he can. As he goes to meet Flag. I can't remember Flag's right-hand man's name.
Oh, what was it, Lloyd?
I think it's Lloyd. He's running with another guy who's demented, and they go on like a killing spree. His buddy gets killed, and he's thrown into prison. Flag rescues him as he starts to become a cannibal and eats the guy in the next cell out of desperation. We got Nadine Cross and the little kid whose name's escaping me. There's so many characters, you can't blame me. There's a whole bunch of characters. We're just gonna name a few. Nadine is crazy and she's like into Larry, but not because she's saving herself for Flag.
Yeah,
And
because for
basically
some reason Randall Flagg wants a little kid with her.
I think it's to be the Antichrist.
Hmm.
I think that's what that is, although thankfully it's not specifically said because I would be irritated. But she's the most annoying character ever.
Yeah.
Harold Lauder is the original incel.
Yeah, I guess that's a good description.
You know who played Nadine Cross in the latest miniseries of The Stand?
Was it Amber Heard?
It was. You know who played the Trash Can Man?
Ezra Miller?
Yes.
And then Mother
Who's
Abigail
also-
was...
I think it was Whoopi Goldberg.
Yeah, Whoopi Goldberg. What a
I
cast of
don't-
characters.
I don't recommend the new version of The Stand.
I would honestly recommend the 90s one, because it's not good. It's by Mick
It's
Garris,
not.
but it has some cheesy charm to it.
And King had a hand in he wrote the screenplay for that one. It's more his vision. In fact, it actually adds in stuff from the uncut version. Which honestly you can find it on YouTube. It's if you know where to look. The new versions, it's higher budget, but certain characters are gender swapped or race swapped for no real apparent reason. It's fine. But the best part of this book is the first third, and that is the Captain Trips. In fact, there's two chapters back to back. The first is when Captain Trips officially just hits everyone, just starts killing people left and right. That's awesome. It reminds me of that chapter in Salem's Lot where everyone becomes a vampire.
Oh yeah, where we just got these many different scenes all over the place. And we get told how it spreads, and it's like, yeah, that's awesome.
And more is added in the complete uncut version, like those military guys that are black that are killing all the white military guys on TV.
Oh yeah.
Which is only referenced in the cut version. That what's her face? Franny sees it on TV. It's like, that's a really violent TV program. How are they doing that? Because there's a few things where you could tell in the cut version that things were left out. Because in the uncut version, those are left in, and so there's a redundancy. Specifically in the second part of the book. So people are getting killed left and right, and then there's a second chapter of people that accidentally died that were immune to Captain Trips. The dude that has the heart attack. The woman who was so thankful that her awful husband and child died, and she accidentally locks herself into a walk-in freezer and freezes to death. Like, there's like a small chapter of that I found really fascinating.
Darkly comedic?
Yes. And then you start getting really into the second part, which is everyone's trying to get to Mother Abigail primarily. The Trash Can Man's Odyssey is in this too. But you really don't hear a lot about what Flag's doing. Although Flag's chapter, I didn't mention that. That's one of the best chapters of the book is when Flag's introduced. And you really understand how evil he is. And it's like, oh God, it's a couple hundred pages into the book and Flag shows up. Like, that's how long this book takes to get anywhere.
I think it's at least 300 pages until he shows up, the main villain.
Yes. And, like, he just is chaos.
I love the scene, like, the visuals of it. You know, he's walking down the street, we get all his, thoughts, his story. And then he just starts, like, going like this and starts levitating. And that's also interesting, because you can tell King changed Flag over the years in his later books. Because
Yes.
in this, it's almost implied like he definitely comes across like supernatural, but it almost seems like he's a regular human who, during this crisis, becomes this supernatural being.
Yes.
Because it seems
Well,
like he's growing in strength and stuff.
should we just talk about the Dark Tower connection?
Obviously, we have to.
We have to, even though we haven't gone to the Dark Tower yet. He is the familiar stranger, which we'll get to in the third Dark Tower book, which will be 2 seasons from now. And that's one of the things with the uncut version is that to make him so that he's Walter / Martin, who's Roland's Deschain's nemesis. And he's a lot of other villains in Stephen King books. They're all Flag.
Most of them are called like RF, the initials.
Mm-hmm.
He's in Hearts in Atlantis, for example. Eyes of the Dragon, he's just Flag.
Mm-hmm.
And he's in the Gwendy trilogy.
Of course he's in there.
Where he suddenly became a good guy.
Yeah. He's in all sorts of stuff. He's the embodiment of evil, pretty much. He's evil's minion, essentially.
AKA a minion of the Crimson King, which is not really referenced in here, but there's a like accidental foreshadowing because he has like one of the buttons on his jacket is like the red eye.
Sorry about that. My neighbor's dog's going nuts. Yeah. I think that's on purpose in the uncut version.
Is it in the cut version at all? Like the
I
description
didn't
that he
see
has?
it, but that's such
Oh.
a small detail that I don't know if I would have noticed it. But the second part of this book is that everyone's going to Mother Abigail. They're getting these horrible nightmares, which they don't realize they're all sharing. Of Flags scaring them. I mean, he's like threatening Franny with an abortion with a coat hanger, like just awful, heinous stuff. And as we get into the second part, we start getting introduced to more characters. I mean, the one that gets me is the scene where it's Stu, Harold, the professor, and Franny are all on their bikes and they run into that caravan of those crazed deserter soldiers that have all the women sex slaves. So they have the gunfight. And so we end up with a bunch more characters. Do you remember that at all?
I vaguely remember it, yeah.
Well, yeah, it's one of like these women are all they're all drugged up and like forced to have sex, and then one gets her ass wiped with barbed wire. I'm sorry, everyone, but that's a warning because I didn't remember that until reading it, and I was mortified. And meanwhile, Trash Can Man's having his adventure with the kid, which the kid is almost non-existent in the cut version. In the third act, Larry finds his body and thinks of him as the Wolfman. And you're wondering, like, why is this in here? And it's like, oh, it's the kid. He's a crazed dude who says that happy crappy.
Hmm.
He has this weird way of talking.
And he forces the Trash Can Man to sex. I remember
With
that
a
scene
gun.
vividly.
Like, in his butt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is not for children.
I want to mention King in his like foreword to the 90s edition. He specifically says, "Oh, that's what I wanted to add back in." Like, shame
Well,
people
because
never get to meet him.
It doesn't make sense how crazy Trash Can Man is. He's barely in the cut version. Then, so everyone ends up they take Mother Abigail to the Boulder, Colorado. And Harold Lauder and Nadine Cross scheme to just destroy the town council.
Get used to the town council because I remember that being like,
oh, that's the worst of the book. It's kind of interesting. It's kind of not. Where they talk about the politics and rebuilding and it's forever and forever and forever until Harold saves us by bombing them and killing some people, which I won't say who.
I think King even I might be wrong, but I think King even said like, "Oh, he did that because he had way too many characters." And he was like,
Uh-huh.
"Oh, how do I get rid of some of them?" Bomb.
Blow them up. Hmm.
A good solution.
Yeah. And then the final act of several of our characters have to go to be essentially sacrificed. Um, and we have our final confrontation with Flag, and the literal hand of God shows up. So I'm not a big fan of that.
Yeah.
Um, in any adaptation of The Stand, I've not been a fan of that. Um, in some ways, I like the biblical symbolism of it. In other ways, it's very, no pun intended, hand-fisted. Um,
Isn't it like a literal Deus ex machina?
yeah, that's why I don't like it.
Hmm.
I
I
get
kind
that.
of like what I like about it is the idea of like the trash can man coming back with like this,
With the
explosive
nuke.
with a fucking nuke. That's fun. And then the bad guys basically wipe themselves out on
Yes.
accident, where I'm like, okay, that's nice. But yeah, the hand of God stuff, we have to get into the religious elements because that's big in this book.
Yes, like I said in the beginning, it's his most religious book. Aside from Revival, has a lot of religious undertones to it.
And desperation, I would also
And
like.
I always forget Desperation. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's about faith.
Yeah, but for me, stuff like desperation, specifically desperation, doesn't really work with that because it's like it's annoying in desperation, honestly, and kind
Desperation's
of
way too long is the issue.
yeah, yeah, and it's kind of actually distracting in desperation because you wanted to enjoy this like schlocky horror premise of
Hmm.
this demon in the desert taking over, Ron Perlman essentially, the sheriff, and killing everybody. And then you
Yeah.
have like a 10-year-old kid constantly talking about God, and it's mostly annoying. With The Stand, like that's a premise you should do religious stuff because
Yeah,
it
it's
really
the
is
end.
like end of the world stuff.
Yeah, it's the end.
Mhm.
Um, and what I don't like about the uncut version is the end with Flag, because that's not in the cut version.
Hmm.
And I get why he did it, because Flag in Flag's form shows up at the Dark Tower, specifically Wizarding Glass, where Roland and his team are walking through what's left of the Stand universe.
Mhm.
If for some reason it doesn't add anything.
I mean, it's The Stand universe. We get to see a different world again,
Yeah, but
establishing that.
none of the characters show up except for Flag.
I mean, we get a reference with the TikTok man instead of the trash can man.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Flag literally references the trash can man. He says something like he loved him until he betrayed him.
Yeah, he did. He was one of his favorites. Because Trash Can Man said my life for you all the time. And he thought he was going to Shangri-La when he went to Vegas because he's crazy.
That's great.
Yeah. Um it's interesting. There's a lot of things we're leaving out, and I wanted to do that. I'm doing that on purpose so that you all can get something out of this. Because it's worth reading at least once, I
Yeah.
think. As for the adaptations, neither miniseries is that good.
Hmm.
But if you have to pick one, go with the original because it's more King's Vision, a little bit more. The other one's just nice because it has nice effects. And no one watched it. That's the thing. It was a Paramount Plus exclusive
Yeah.
at the beginning of Paramount Plus, and no one had it. So it was this high budgeted thing. And I know they tried to get Matthew McConaughey to come back to be Flag, but he said no because the Dark Tower movie bombed.
Who plays Flag instead? I barely know anything about the
I don't
new
know
adaptation.
his name.
Hmm.
He was someone I wasn't familiar with. He was fine.
Okay.
The other guy in the original, he's iconic, and I never remember that actor's name.
Was it something Sheridan?
Maybe I don't know.
Yeah,
Um,
but I know what you mean. Iconic, his look and everything.
Yeah, he's one of the most. He's considered one of the most iconic Stephen King film / TV adaptation villains,
Hmm.
like ever.
Right up there with Kathy Bates and Misery.
I mean,
Which we should mention. I'm pretty sure that's in The Stand. Kathy Bates is in there. She's filling in. There's like a scene in this, like we said at the beginning, where we get all these different scenarios, people dying because of Captain Trips. One of them is a radio personality who gets gunned down by the military because he's
Yes.
spreading the truth. And in the 90s adaptation, that's Kathy Bates who gets gunned down.
That's funny. She was in a few King's things in the 90s.
Yeah, she's in obviously Misery. She's in Dolores Claiborne, Stand.
Yeah, she was one of his favorites, the actresses for his stuff. But yeah, I know you're not a big fan of The Stand.
Not really. Like we said, the beginning is great. The middle is too long, especially all the stuff in Colorado and Boulder. That's just oof. That's rough to get through. And then the final is a Deus Ex Machina. So I always finish the book. It's disappointing on my first read because I just didn't get the love for it. I like Flag as the main villain. I like a lot of the characters, but overall it doesn't really come together.
See, for me, I get why people like it, and I'm one of those people. But with a caveat that there's with a book this long, you're going to end up with wonky things. And those are the town council meetings. They are necessary. There are so many characters in this. Like it's practically we'd be here 4 hours trying to explain every character in The Stand. It seems like he took the issues with the characters in Salem's Lot. There were just too many of them, and most of them didn't get characterization. And he rectified that with The Stand.
Yeah, I think we mentioned this before, how his books in this early era feel different, because with Carrie, we pretty much have like one character and like a couple, high school students. Salem's Lot, an entire town.
Yes.
Shining, just a family. And now in this, we get basically all of America.
Yes. I can't remember if we rate these or not.
A rating? I don't think we do. I think we recommend or don't recommend.
Okay, well, I recommend The Stand. These are some of his most fleshed out characters ever. There's a fleshed out characters. There's a reason this is like everyone's favorite book he's ever written. It's not his favorite book.
No, his favorite is Lisey's story.
I didn't know. I didn't know that. But would you recommend it?
Yes, I would. Like I said, not a big fan of it, but reading it once, I would definitely recommend. Maybe you enjoy it more. Definitely the beginning, and there is great stuff in here, but for me, it just doesn't come together into like a great overall book.
So anyway, join us next time as we hop into the Bachman universe again with The Long Walk. And for those of you who are live, we'll take some questions right now or any sort of stuff. Maxwell Unash says, I like books uncut. Like my men. Honestly, so when I tried to I tried to look up on YouTube the differences between the cut and uncut versions of The Stand, Maxwell, and everyone was asking. It was a bunch of videos of the difference between being circumcised and being uncircumcised and what that's like during intercourse. And I was like, this is not what I'm trying to look up right now.
Great. Oh, what I didn't mention, what we should do each time, the German titles. So for The Stand, it's titled The Stand, The Last Stand.
I forgot to ask that. We'll just throw that in when we record The Long Walk.
Okay.
Adjust my mic. Are you ready?
Let me get a quick bit of water.
Yeah. Might get some wine when we jump to Dead Zone. But for right now, Long Walk. Which... Okay. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to King of Our Nightmares. We're jumping back onto the Bachmann train with The Long Walk. Or what is it called in German?
In German, it's called Todesmarsch, which means Death March, which is accurate enough.
And what was the stand called? We forgot to talk about that in the last episode.
The Stand, famously, is called The Stand, The Last Stand. That's up there with the Star Wars novel Shadow Games, In the Shadows, where they just keep the English title and then basically translate it as a subtitle.
All right. So, The Long Walk's fascinating because it was King's first novel. He wrote it when he was 18. He tried to get it published. It got denied. He was embarrassed and shelved it. And it wouldn't be till after The Stand that it would get released under the Bachmann moniker, the pseudonym that he wrote under for a long time because he was writing too many books, which now they wouldn't even bother with that. But it fits in the Bachmann it fits as a Richard Bachman book, where the Bachman books are pretty down. They're very downtrodden books. Also, this is loose. It's an allegory for Vietnam in a lot of ways. It's also a parody of JFK used to have these like walks for health thing. So it's a play on that. Essentially, The Long Walk is about a guy named Garrity.
Ray Garrity.
Ray Garrity. He signed up to do The Long Walk, and he's at 16, I do believe. There's a bunch of these kids. They range from 13 to 17 or 18. And they basically, the US has kind of become a military regime. And once a year, they have these young men, boys basically, walk from the Canadian border down to potentially, I guess, Florida, although it's never gone that far. And they are forced to walk at about 4 miles an hour. They can't stop to pee, eat, shit. They can't do any of that. If they're stopped, they get 3. If they stop, they get 3 warnings and then are killed. And it is every detail of what a forced march would be like.
Mm-hmm.
It is miserable in the best way possible. Honestly, this was a breath of fresh air after reading The Stand.
I believe it.
I read this in, I think, 2 days. It's a very fast-paced read. It's one of your favorites, if I'm not mistaken.
It is maybe my favorite of the Bachmann books. It's definitely one of my favorite King books, of all time. Maybe even just books of all time. This one really works for me.
It works for me, too, and I believe that all YA fiction owes The Long Walk. Like Hunger Games, Divergent, they all owe their creativity to The Long Walk. In fact, this is a big this is a popular one for teens to read.
Makes sense.
And it doesn't feel like a YA
Mhm.
at all. It's not. It is a very nihilistic view of what the US could be. And it kind of predicts the reality TV trend. This and Running Man. Running Man,
Oh
when
yeah,
we get to that, is also
they have
kind
they have a
of
very similar-ish like premise and tone in a way.
Mhm.
Both are basically like dystopian futures.
Yes. And both involve television.
Yeah. Running Man is going to be interesting when we get to it because that book takes place in 2025, the far distant future.
Yeah. Although the Hummer did come back. But I digress. Um this it's one of my favorites of King's work. It's the most refreshing.
Hmm.
I
It's
think.
something drastically different from the previous 70s books.
Well, I mean, it was written probably in the 60s,
Yeah.
right at the height of Vietnam. And it's basically like these guys just forced to walk and how they interact with one another. And one of them's just an asshole. The others, like, some of them go insane. One has like a seizure and he ends up getting shot. Um,
And that's just such a great part of the book. You get
mhm,
Ray Garrity as the main character. We
mhm.
follow him through the entire book. And we get introduced to all the other contestants because it's like 100 young boys.
Yes, there's a
Yeah.
hundred of them.
So he interacts with many of them. He forms rivalries and friendships.
Mhm.
And then we get over the 300 pages something that this book is, fast paced. We get all the characters, the interactions, and we know every single one of them is gonna die.
Mhm.
And it's still like gut wrenching every time.
Yeah, and some of the best ones are like people we never interacted with, and you hear the gunshot,
Yeah.
and someone has punched their ticket. That's what they keep saying. Punch their ticket. And just the amount of people watching them,
On the sidelines,
on
watching
the
and
si-
holding up like signs. Yeah.
and I mean, Garrity at the beginning makes out with a girl
Oh, yeah.
that isn't his girlfriend, and then feels bad for a while. But he was going to punch his ticket. He gets a warning, and the thing is, like, the warnings go away after a while if you've been, consistent. But I mean, they don't get to sleep. They don't get to rest. They're out there for days. And it's just it rains on them at one point. It's really hot at another point.
Yeah. And besides them, there's like this military vehicle. I don't remember exactly what it was. Something
Mm.
futuristic, I think.
Yeah.
And they get like army soldiers come running up to them. They give them water and food every now and then.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
There's the less we say about the long walk, the better, because it's a very short book.
Hmm.
And it's really, really good. It's brutal though. We talked about some brutal things in The Stand, but the overall tone of Long Walk is brutal. It's basically anything you could think of bad happening if you were forced to march somewhere does happen.
Yeah. And I think this book really cemented for me, like, I like Bagman books more than King. In a way. Because Rage was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting
Oh, I
premise, quick
wholeheartedly.
read.
Yeah.
But The Long Walk, you wouldn't guess that's King's first written book.
No.
That's so goddamn good. And I think that ties into what you say, that like young people especially like this one.
Mm-hmm.
Probably because he wrote it when he himself was young, and it's
Mm-hmm.
mostly about people his age, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, and refreshing, especially after The Stand, to have something. It's a simple concept, but it's taken to an extreme. And this is the second one of these where there is no film adaptation of The Long Walk yet. I know there's allegedly someone's working on one.
Yeah. You know what is a shame? You know who had the rights? Apparently, I might be misremembering,
So
but
Frank Darabont,
it was Frank Darabont, and then
which
he
that
lost
could
it.
have been really good.
That could have been so awesome. He would have been the best person to adapt this.
Yeah, but people hated The Mist when it came out. It's a
Which is
shame.
a shame.
We'll talk about that when we review Skeleton Crew. But
But it's weird this didn't get a film adaptation, especially not. What was the time like the Hive, the fucking YA adaptations? You know, Hunger Games. You got
the early 2010s.
yeah. I'm surprised
Yeah.
they didn't just say, "Oh my god, look, we got a Stephen King property." Just
It's too brutal.
quickly.
That's why they would try to make it PG-13. This
Yeah.
can't be. In fact, I'd argue it'd be hard to make this an R.
Hmm.
This could be easily become NC-17 because they're teens, they're kids,
Right.
and that. I mean, now we live in a time where a lot of things just get an R rating. That might be one that pushes it.
I guess it depends how you show their death.
Yeah, you'd have to get clever. You couldn't be nearly as graphic, but there are ways around that in film to show the brutality.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, some of them I don't exactly remember if it was like this, but some of them we don't see
Yeah.
dying, but we hear like the gunshot and stuff.
Oh
And
yeah.
you can do
yeah.
stuff
in
like
the
that.
night.
Yeah.
In the middle of the night, you'll hear the they'll be walking, you hear it, and it's like someone punched their ticket, and you can't even tell.
Mhm.
But yeah. Stupid dog. Yeah, it's a good one. It's well worth your time to read this.
Mhm. And
Highly recommended.
highly. One of the best Bagman books, maybe the absolute best,
Mhm.
but definitely above Rage.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Rage is wonky. Easier to get than Rage.
Yeah.
Good
Thankfully-
audiobook. That's something I should mention.
Hmm.
Stupid dog. It's not even a dog that lives here. It's like my neighbor's girlfriend's dog. But he freaks out. He looks into my window and barks at me. I've never had a dog that has barked at me when I'm inside the house. But anyway, closing thoughts?
Just that it's a great book, a
Mhm.
short and quick read, and that's most of the Bagman books, which is why I also think they are better. They are more to the point, they
Mhm.
are psychological,
Mhm.
and they just work, and they have this depressing, dark atmosphere, and it just works.
Yeah.
It's just a fun read, so to speak.
Fun. It's well worth your time. So,
Mhm.
anyway, next episode we close out the 70s with The Dead Zone. Thank you all for tuning in. All right. Like we said before, we're trying to record all these together. Maxwell had another comment. In all seriousness, 1,000-page book sounds kind of grueling. What are good short King books, 500 pages or less? The Long Walk.
Yes, definitely The Long Walk, and I will say Misery.
Misery.
If you haven't read Misery, read Misery. Dolores Claiborne. Revival.
Revival. Gerald's Game. I would argue that that's one of my favorites. Although I've been told it's horribly boring, but I don't think so, because that's one of the things that preys on a personal phobia of mine, being trapped somewhere. If you want something short, some of his novellas have been printed by themselves. Like you can read like The Body or The Mist.
Oh, Langelius.
Yeah. stuff like that. Like, I got my start. I read The Mist out of Skeleton Crew, and I didn't read all of Skeleton Crew. I just picked some stories like The Raft and that.
Mhm.
That
So
sort of thing.
basically, we can also recommend his short story collections, even though those are sometimes like 800 pages.
Yeah, like
Yeah, but they are shorts.
specifically 3 I would recommend. Night Shift, which we have reviewed on here, so you
Mhm.
can check that out. Skeleton Crew, Different Seasons would be the other one that I would recommend, because that is more slice of life stuff. It's very interesting. 3 of the 4 stories got made into well, 2 of them got made into very good movies. One was made, The Apt Pupil was made into a bad movie.
By bad people. You know
Who
who
made?
directed it?
Was it Bryan Singer?
Yeah.
I kind of remember that. But yeah, anyway, got one from the anonymous gamer here. Says, what Stephen King books do you recommend? Best/worst. Worst would be Sleeping Beauties.
No contest.
No contest. You want to read The Stand with social justice and really bad politics.
And just bad characters and a bad female version of Randall Flagg. It felt like Owen King wrote that, like him trying to copy his dad's most famous book.
Yeah.
It feels like a ripoff.
Yeah, and I
Which is-
honestly don't think Stephen King wrote a lot of it.
Hmm.
Also, in that vein, the Gwendy books are pretty bad too. But for best, I don't know what would be the best.
Okay, I've come to this conclusion recently. The best singular standalone Stephen King novel.
Mhm.
Misery.
Okay, I can see that. I maybe The Shining as well.
Maybe.
Shining's really solid. And it's not too long. Same with I do love Salem's Lot. It has a few issues with it, but it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and also short enough.
Short enough. Yeah. There's a lot that I think are good. I mean, a lot of people like it, but it's a mess.
A glorious mess.
Yeah. It would never be, King would never write that today. That
Oh,
was
definitely not.
that was the height of his drug use, was it.
We would never get Maturin the turtle.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, he made sense of that later when he wasn't on drugs anymore. But the Dark Tower books are well worth your time. But you're committing to 8 books.
Yeah, which I mean, you can read The Gunslinger, see if you like it, but even then, Drawing of the Free and onwards is like very different writing style.
Yeah, each book has a different style. And it has a different gimmick with it. And they all work except for Song of Susanna. That doesn't quite work. The style's not the issue, though. It's just, it feels like a nothing book. But
Yeah, it's like just connecting book 5 and 7, essentially. But
yeah, it was like there was too much material for those 2 books, and those 2 books are really long. So they had a short book in between. It doesn't really lead anywhere. But anyway, you want to jump? Oh, we got one more.
one more.
We'll do. What did you think of the Gerald's Game movie? I walked away from the film thinking that the premise would work a lot better in book form. Yeah, I loved the movie. I saw it for the first time 2 months ago. And I think I messaged you immediately after seeing it. I loved it because there hadn't been a lot of good adaptations of King stuff in recent years.
Mm-hmm.
The good stuff you have to go look for.
Yeah, it's not the big stuff, so to speak, like the Pet Cemetery remake.
Oh, you
Or
mean
this-
when they wanted the girl to look like the Ring Girl?
Yeah, or the Salem's Lot remake that's gonna come out this
Yeah.
year, maybe.
I shut off Firestarter. Did I tell you I tried to watch that?
Oh, the remake.
Yeah, it's bad. It's got a great John Carpenter score though.
Oh, that's nice.
That's why I was watching it, because I had listened to the score. But yeah, Zac Efron's the dad. And I get that he played Ted Bundy in a movie. I have not seen that, but he will forever be the High School Musical boy that lip synced all of his singing because he can't actually sing.
Oh man.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the original Firestarter. I think I'm gonna do that when we get
It's
to the
not
book.
that good.
Yeah.
Neither of these are. It makes me wonder, because I've read Firestarter but don't remember it. Makes me wonder if the book's that good.
I think we will get to it, but I think it's a decent book, but it's like the most dated. Like you can tell that's 80s King.
Mm-hmm. Is it Drug King yet?
Not really.
Okay.
It's not the giant turtle.
Yeah. Or
But yeah,
Maximum Overdrive.
Maximum Overdrive is that's the most King movie ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But quick regarding the Gerald's Game movie and book comparison, for a long time it was like, oh, you can't make that into a movie at all because, you know, the way the book is structured and everything, it's mostly one character, everything in her head. You can't really do that. And then
they did it so smart.
Mike Flanagan, who also did Doctor Sleep, the movie adaptation, and now has the rights for The Dark Tower and is going to make that.
Yes, because he actually makes a Dark Tower reference in Gerald's Game, the movie, that's not in the book.
Oh, I've heard about it. What was it?
Oh, Gerald says all things connect to the beam.
Nice.
And it feels really weird. They did it because the Dark Tower movie came out the same year as Gerald's Game, which that is a horrible movie.
And you know we have to talk about it at some point.
Yeah.
I got it
might
cheap.
do a watch along with that. It's that bad that we might just have to do just a sort of riff track. We'll call it shit tracks of it. One more from Maxwell. The original Firestarter has a great performance from George C. Scott and an awesome score from Tangerine Dream. He passed away recently. I'll have to listen to that. I just don't remember. I remember Drew Barrymore was great for being a child actor in it. I can't remember if she did that first or E.T. It's the same era, but she was great. That's the only thing I remember from the original Firestarter. And I just remember thinking it was kind of meh. There are better 80s King adaptation movies, like the one we're going to talk about shortly. So anyway, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of King of Our Nightmares, where we wrap up the 70s with The Dead Zone. Or what is it called in German?
It's a subtitle similar to The Stand, The Last Stand. The Dead Zone is just called Dead Zone, The Assassination. Because I think the first German translation, it was just called The Assassination. Dead Zone completely gone, and then in recent years they changed it back to just Dead Zone because they realized the assassination doesn't happen until the last 50 pages.
Oh Lord, let's talk about the Dead Zone.
I think this is going to be a nice one because we have different opinions on this one.
Yeah. Do you want to sum up Dead Zone?
Dead Zone, sure. It's about, a regular teacher, Johnny Smith. No middle name, not anything. John Smith, regular guy, everyday man, who, after a date with a colleague, Sarah, gets into a car accident. He falls into a coma, and 5 years later he wakes up, and his already existing supernatural powers, have strengthened, and he becomes what do you call it?
A psychic?
Yeah, psychic, and kind of a famous person in the media. And then we just follow him and what he does with his new powers, and it's kind of aimless. but then we get some stuff. He helps the police, and then in the final we get to his big moment where, with his powers, he has a chance to, a chance to change the course of history. Bad things are going to happen with this one person, and he has to come to a decision if he has to kill this person, to save the world, essentially.
Yes. Okay. This is the first time, with The Stand in mind, this is the first time Stephen King bit off more than he could chew, in my opinion. This book is three things. It's a recovery story, it is a serial killer story, and it is 70s politics. Because this is a time capsule of the 70s. And specifically the politics of that decade, which, if you follow American politics, it's some of the most fascinating politics you get into. But this is the first time we really start to see King's political opinion. It's not as nearly as bad, like blatant and obnoxious with it, as you'll get in like his more recent stuff, like, oh god, Billy Summers, where he talks about Trump 50 times in the book.
Yeah. Or Sleeping Beauties.
Sleeping Beauties.
Or most of the stuff since 2016, really.
Yeah, the 2010s is when he became really political, but this is a foreshadowing of it. Of course, now he claims that the Greg Stilson character is Donald Trump. That's kind of a stretch. But Greg Stilson's the political adversary in this. We know he's bad because he kicks a dog to death in like the first chapter of the book. Which is a little much. And everyone hated that. He got a lot of hate mail over that one. My favorite part of this book is the recovery process of being in a coma. I think when I read this the first time, I didn't realize what it actually takes to get out of a coma. Because unfortunately, I saw the Steven Seagal movie Hard to Kill, where he does like acupuncture on himself. He aikidos his way out of a coma, which is stupid. But as I saw that as a little kid, and I just assumed that was what it was. And I read this as like an early teen. This was one of the first ones I read. And I was like, oh, this sucks. He keeps having all these surgeries because his body's like basically stiffened so much, so he has all these horrible scars all over his body so he can move again. The Castle Rock Strangler, which is this the first time Castle Rock's been mentioned? Or
yes, I think it's the very first time.
Okay, Castle Rock is a place that King got obsessed with, still is a little bit obsessed with, even though he killed it.
It's a fun story, yeah. So basically, Dead Zone is the first in the Castle Rock cycle, if you want. A bunch of novels and short stories and novellas take place there.
We may have had some of the short stories in Night Shift. Maybe one of them was in Castle Rock.
I don't think so. One of them took place in the Stand universe.
Yeah, we didn't mention that, but we mentioned that in Night Shift.
Yeah.
When we reviewed Night Shift. But the Castle Rock Strangler's interesting, although the conclusion I don't find that satisfying. But the political stuff, it's just hinted throughout the book, and then it becomes the main plot. And I don't think it's good. It's something I think the movie did a lot better with. Not the TV show. There was a horrible, horrible Dead Zone TV show that was a crime drama that went for like 6 seasons and shouldn't have gone through one, because they pretty much wrap up most of the plot lines of the Dead Zone book in like 2 episodes, and badly.
Hmm.
and then the rest of it just sucks. But the reason it's called, we're not explaining why it's called the Dead Zone. Sometimes he can't remember things because he was in a coma for so long. He says it goes to the dead zone. So when he can sometimes get an imprint of something and realize that something's happened to someone, or like he can see the past or the present
Mhm.
by seeing something, and he won't see all of it because it's gone to the dead zone. So that's why the book's called the Dead Zone. Um,
Which I should mention, like his visions and stuff. That's a really fun part in this.
oh, that's cool. Yeah, when he's like on the case for the Castle Rock killer,
Mhm.
that's horrifying. We haven't even, the Castle Rock Strangler is a guy who targets women randomly
Mhm.
and assaults them and murders them.
Yeah,
And
ages
they,
from little girls to grandmas.
yes. And when you find out who that is, which I won't spoil, we won't spoil who that is.
Yeah, we have to spoil it for Cujo.
We,
We have to, because there's wonky, weird shit going on in Cujo with that plotline being picked up.
is it picked up?
It is picked up, and it's bizarre and interesting.
I don't remember that. I don't remember a lot of Cujo except for how uncomfy it was.
Yeah, I mean, King doesn't even remember writing it because he was so high.
It's a shame. It's not a bad book.
Yeah.
It's fairly short.
Mhm.
But yeah, the Greg Stillson stuff for me doesn't work.
Hmm.
There's too much going on in this book and not enough time to deal with it. I really like the drama between Johnny and I think her name's Sarah. That's the woman that he went on that date with that he loves,
Mhm.
but she moves on. She moves on, gets married, and has kids.
Mhm.
And that is just utterly heartbreaking, and like one of those things with being in a coma for so long. She didn't think he was going to ever come out of it. And his mom's a weird religious zealot.
In the style of Carrie.
Yeah, I got a lot of Carrie vibes. I also got a bit of Franny's mom's vibes. Or it. He has a thing for overbearing mothers, like,
Mhm.
and she's wild. And she like gives all their money away to different like religious zealots and stuff.
Yeah, at one point she believes like heaven is literally in space in some
Hmm.
nebula, and then she believes heaven is actually underground and we have to dig to get there.
Yeah, she goes off the deep end, and it's just so sad to see his father just deal with it. Yeah, it's interesting. Johnny just has a miserable life. It's
Yep.
just sad. It's a very sad existence. And so when you get to the end, it makes sense why he does what he does. I just have a problem with the whole wi- getting to the end.
Yeah, and I think that's a structure thing. Like I like
Yes.
all the stuff with, I like the setup. I
Hmm.
like Johnny as a character, his powers, the recovery, and the killer stuff. So that all works. The
Hmm.
problem then is the final, which is supposed to be, his ending and this great sacrifice he's gonna make, changing history essentially,
Hmm.
which the book tries to use like the Castle Rock killer plot as like setup for Johnny, why he wants to stop Greg Stilson. But
But
it
just
doesn't
do it
really
well.
come, yeah, but it doesn't really come together. And Stilson is completely separate for most of the book, and it's just we get little chapters focusing on him.
And how awful he is.
Yeah, yeah. And his rise to power essentially. And we get one thing that was surprising, and I didn't remember it from my first read. Very early on, we get a chapter in some bar, and there is a guy going in who sells lightning rods.
Oh yeah.
And he gets turned down, and then way later in the book, there's the scene where Johnny has a vision that this place is gonna burn down, and all these young people are gonna die in it because of
Yeah.
didn't have a lightning rod. That was weird. I understand having set up for it, but that scene looked so out of place, and it's just King ripping off Ray Bradbury's, something wicked this way comes.
Yeah.
Because literally the scene, the guy selling lightning rods is coming in, and but it doesn't have that magical feel. It's just jarring and confusing why it's there until you get the revelation, oh, this was set up for later. And even then it still doesn't work.
Yeah, I don't. It's some of it just doesn't work for me personally.
Yeah,
Other things do.
It's like he had a great idea,
Mhm.
but then the structure of it is a problem. If you rework this like one final time and you move things around a bit, this can be a great book. As it is, I still enjoy it, but definitely there was room for improvement.
Yeah, but I don't have a lot more to say. Do you?
Not really. Like I said, the characters are fine. Sarah, Johnny, that's good. There's this one. Should we spoil it? There is a little sexual stuff going on that's a bit. That's not quite realistic, but okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh, there is the appearance of this guy who works for like this trashy magazine called Inside View.
Yeah, it's like
A very fun scene because he wants to exploit Johnny essentially because he also thinks Johnny is a fraud. His entire magazine is, frauds. They just sell to like dumb people and trick them. That character, I think his name is Richard Dees. He's the main character in the short story The Night Flyer.
Oh, I know exactly what short story you're talking about. They made it into a movie.
Yeah. Famously, he's the same character. He shows up again. I think the Johnny Smith stuff is even mentioned in the short story.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't put two and two together.
Yeah, but that's an awesome connection already. It's always fun when you recognize it, especially on like big rereads, and you pick up on these little references and characters showing up again.
What's the Night Flyer in?
Nightmares and Dreamscapes.
Okay.
It's one of two vampire stories in there.
Night Flyer, highly recommend.
Yeah, famously, the most famous picture from it is the vampire pissing, and you can't see him, you only see the urine.
But anyway, I recommend this book if you like a time capsule of the 70s and you're really into like drama. It's good drama in this. Not a horror novel.
No.
Not at all.
Even though there's horrific stuff in it, but like you said, drama fits way more. And I would add as a final, it's not as political as I was thinking at first, because when I first read, I didn't remember much of it from my first read. So that's why I was, looking forward to rereading it, seeing like how much politics is actually in this, and it's not a lot, I will say.
Yeah,
or maybe
I mean,
just I don't pick it up as much. There is stuff in there, obviously. The scene you mentioned to me at one point, Johnny
the Jimmy
predicting
Carter scene.
Yeah, Johnny predicting, oh, you're going to be president and stuff, and shaking his hand.
That's a little much.
Yeah.
It felt like the Last Crusade scene when Indy runs into Hitler. Not comparing Jimmy Carter to Hitler. Not making that comparison because I know someone's going to pull that out of context. Not saying that, it's just those two scenes are similar.
Yeah. Except one is really funny and the other one is kind of like
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, one final thing. Greg Stilson as the villain. we have to maybe rank him a bit, like in comparison to the other King villains of the 70s.
He's one of the. In some ways, he's a really good villain, but just how he's placed
Hmm.
isn't good. I mean, Flag's the best antagonist out of all the 70s
Yeah,
villains. I mean, he's like one of the greatest antagonists ever. I mean, he's the antagonist. Um, there really aren't any. I mean, the protagonist of Rage is also the antagonist.
yeah.
And The Long Walk doesn't really have an antagonist.
Hmm.
Aside from the Colonel, I guess. But, I mean, like, he's barely in it.
I mean, Carrie, we got her mom and, the other student,
The bullies, yeah.
the bullies. Salem Slot, we got, of course, Barlow.
Barlow's great.
Hmm.
So, see, I go Flag, Barlow, because Barlow's really interesting.
Hmm.
Greg Stilson would be third, not because he's probably on par with Barlow, but the way he's utilized is not that good, I think, in the book, and that's just a structural issue that I have to take into consideration.
Okay.
The Overlook, I guess the Overlook's the primary antagonist. I put that at fourth. All those villains are good.
Mhm.
Putting the Overlook and Jack Torrance low. I argue that Jack Torrance isn't the antagonist of the Shining. He's more the protagonist. He's the one that undergoes the change.
Yeah, he's the victim
He's the
of
victim.
the villain. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with this villain ranking.
All are solid. Do we want to do a separate episode where we rank all the King books, or do we just want to do it now?
I guess we can do it now. We have some time left. I mean, if you're up for it.
Yeah,
Oh.
we'll just add it to this episode.
But before it, we should quickly mention the movie adaptation of Dead Zone, which I haven't watched.
Have you watched it?
No, I haven't watched it yet. Didn't have the time, but
It's fine. I really like Christopher Walken as Johnny.
yeah, it's by David Cronenberg and Christopher. Okay, the one thing I will say, it is weird seeing a young Christopher Walken. It's kind of uncanny.
Yeah, he does a good job. It's a bit different from the novel.
Mhm.
Yeah, the film is fine.
One of the few great ones, because we are still in the 70s.
It's probably the least graphic Cronenberg film. I didn't even know it was a Cronenberg film until you told me just now.
Oh.
Yeah,
Wow.
no, I didn't know this was directed by David Cronenberg. I love Cronenberg.
Yeah, because because this is the 70s, and with these books, like, this is what made King famous. Not just those books, but the movie adaptations by big names. Because obviously Carrie, Brian De Palma, Salem Slot, Toby Hooper.
Yeah,
not necessarily
Kubrick.
Dead Zone, Cronenberg. And then obviously The Stand later. But yeah.
Later. And like in the same era, we also have Christine's Carpenter film.
Exactly. And then obviously we get into stuff like, Misery, Dolores Shawshank.
Green Mile,
Yeah. But those early ones.
The Mangler,
The Mangler, definitely. All-time favorite. But really, I think Dead Zone is one most people know. The basic premise: guy wakes up from coma, can see the future. It's really like in pop culture, it's a thing.
And the Greg Wilson stuff, especially after Trump. I mean, I think it was BuzzFeed did a video with Stephen King, which was just Stephen King. I call it George Lucas smugness. Just sat there like, yeah, I predicted this. It's like when George Lucas decided at some point after he sold Star Wars to Disney that Star Wars was an allegory for Vietnam. He's been on the record saying it was an allegory for World War II.
I mean, you gotta give Lucas a break, okay? He's made so many great things. He made the first movie to ever have black people on screen with red
Yeah,
tails. So
Red Tail. This is groundbreaking.
yeah, gotta
He did
cut him some
Strange
slack.
Magic, and someone watched it.
Someone watched it. Did it make any money?
No. That's scarier than any of these books we've talked about.
Oh boy, Strange Magic.
Oh, anyway, let's rank the 70s King stuff, the golden age of King. Can we
All right.
say that?
Oh yeah, it's definitely the golden age. Like I just said, that's his stuff, the most famous one, the most like ingrained into pop culture. Because pretty much everyone knows like the basics of those stories, like Shining or Dead Zone or The Stand.
So, what would you say is the worst one? I'm not saying it's bad necessarily, but it
Okay.
is the least.
Okay, I have to get. First off, we have to break it down again by release. What came out in the 70s?
So we had Carrie.
Yeah. Give me a second. I'm looking for my quick list.
Put him on the spot. He didn't know we were going to do this many of them tonight.
Yeah. Okay, 70s. We got Carrie, 1974. 75 was Salem's Lot. 77 was The Shining. Also 77 was Rage. 78 Night Shift, and then also The Stand. Then 79 The Long Walk, and finally The Dead Zone.
Okay. So at the bottom of my list is Rage.
Okay.
And I will. Rage is a fantastic concept, but the teenage like slang talk is nonsense, and it doesn't quite work. Having the protagonist be the one holding all the kids hostage is a fascinating take.
Yeah, and like the usual like protagonist, Ted Jones, I think he was called, who like in any other story he would be the protagonist, but he's the villain more or less in this story. That's a fascinating concept.
Yes. Is that where you would rank Rage?
I don't think so. I think you go first and then we go mine, because mine is a little bit more controversial, I feel.
Oh, you want me just to do my whole list?
Yeah, okay, let's do it.
Okay, next, Carrie.
Mhm.
Carrie's one half a good book and the other half a mediocre book. And it's not broken down like the first part's good or the. Whenever it's the actual narrative, it's good. Whenever it's like talking about scientific paperwork on telekinesis and stuff, that's kind of dumb.
The famous inserts.
The inserts are just not that good. Next, I would go with The Dead Zone.
Mhm.
It's fine. Some things structurally it has issues, but overall it's a good story. Next, these are all really good, though. I'd have to go with The Shining.
All right.
Next, Shining. Then I go Night Shift.
Mhm.
Night Shift's all over the place, but I do love when Stephen King writes short stories.
And it has some really great ones in there.
It has some incredible ones. Then I go The Stand. Then Salem's Lot. And then I put The Long Walk as the best of the 70s.
All right.
Oh,
I'm actually writing it down just so I don't forget anything. Okay, my list is a bit more controversial. A little bit. All right, at the bottom of my list, gonna hate me, The Stand.
I knew you were going to do that. It's too long for you. It's so much. I get it. No, I get it.
Yeah, just I wasn't feeling it, and I know I'm in the minority on this one.
Yeah.
But even still, I would recommend giving it a shot if you can take a book that in the German paperback is 1,700 pages.
Yeah, it's really long.
It's a behemoth. Okay, so that's at the bottom. Then next up would be above it would be Rage.
Okay.
Because I do like the premise. It's a quick read. It's definitely a depressing psychological thing.
Yeah.
And some of the things in it don't work, obviously, like the young people talking. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. He felt a little out of touch.
Yeah, which is weird because he wrote this when he was young.
Mm.
But yeah, that's King. It gets worse in his later books. You did try to read Fairy Tale, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because I do enjoy that book, but the main kid in it references movies from the 60s and 70s,
hmm
and in the first
I,
half he constantly mentions, I went to the YouTube and I looked up tutorials and videos how to do stuff.
I wonder if Stephen King has grandchildren.
Oh, he has a bunch of them. Yeah,
Are they all Joes?
mostly Joe's, maybe some of Owen.
Yeah, I know his daughter doesn't have any children.
Mhm.
Um,
But yeah, it's interesting, this era of badly written young characters compared to later when he just turned into the, how do you do, fellow kids meme.
well, eventually he stopped writing kids for a while.
Real what era? Because I'm struggling to think of
That's
it
like
right
the
now.
2000s. It's like what Black House and all that.
Black House still has like a child as the MacGuffin, essentially.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Yeah. But later on, you get stuff like The Institute, which has a bunch of
Oh, that's something.
like it has 10-year-olds. It has like an 8-year-old girl saying, "My mom told me Trump is bad," which was,
Um,
I think it was the only reference to Trump, but it was so stupid and out of place. I don't believe. No,
the
Steve,
Institute's kind of garbage.
it is.
It's a shame. It was a fascinating premise.
Yeah, until we get, you know, the resolution, like what it's all about. And I wish he would have connected it to Firestarter and the shop, but
Yeah, yeah, it's a little frustrating.
yeah.
Um, what's next?
Okay, so bottom two, The Stand, then Rage. Then we get to Carrie, which I do like. Uh, I find the concept with the inserts fascinating. Some of them, sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it does, but overall it's a decent read. It's more important for its uh, historic importance because it's his first novel.
Yeah.
Then we get to The Dead Zone,
Mhm.
which is fine. It's fun. It still has problems, but it's already more refined than like Carrie or Rage,
Mhm.
definitely. Then we get Night Shift. Not my favorite short story collection. I have to reread them all, but it is fun. It has some of the great ones. Battleground. That one alone is worth it. Fighting
Yeah.
the toy soldiers. Yeah.
I mean, I just watched that episode of Nightmares and Dreamscapes, which that was the pilot episode, and it's not even from the book. It's from Night Shift. It's a fun one.
Mhm.
But you also have Lawnmower Man.
Oh yeah, the short story that inspired the movie.
That movie's better than the short story. That's saying something because that movie's not good.
Yeah, but that short story, that's just King on drugs, and it didn't work out.
Was it? Or Quitters Inc.
Oh yeah,
That's a solid one.
Mhm. Jerusalem's Lot, which leads me to my top 3, actually.
Yeah.
Number 3 is Salem's Lot.
Okay.
Obviously, I like it. Not too big into vampires, but this one is just fun. The atmosphere of the small town, all the townspeople, you know.
Mhm.
First time with a writer as the main character.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
it
true.
works. It works. It's fun. Then we get number 2, The Shining.
Okay. Yeah.
Just solid characters, supernatural stuff. It's great. Highly recommend. And then number 1, like I said, it's got to be The Long Walk.
Oh yeah. And that was the one I don't think I had read before recording this.
Hmm.
It was the one that surprised me the most.
Yeah, the Bachman books, just damn fine stuff.
It might be the best Bachman book. I'm trying to remember what if I've read Roadwork.
Oh, Roadwork, I was going to say, that's going to be interesting because that doesn't have any supernatural. It's more slice of life. And that one is depressing, even among the Bachman books, because it's really just a man breaking down and losing his mind.
Isn't it referenced in Wolves of the Kala?
Kind of. It's not directly referenced, but in Roadwork, there seems to be setup for Callahan and his further adventures, which is insane. And it's not just a crazy fan theory, like, I'm convinced King already had something planned because the character in Roadwork is not said to be Callahan, but he's identical in every way. You gotta see it when we get to it, but I'm looking forward to that.
So anyway, that's the end of the season. Season that took 2 years.
But we did it with a great, epic final 4-in-1. 3 reviews and a ranking.
Yeah, I'll just throw the ranking though on the Dead Zone, I think.
All right.
Because that episode was pretty short. I had a feeling we could do it. I had a feeling we could record all these at once because 2 of them would be fairly short.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was season 1. We'll return in a few months to. I'm not sure what we're gonna tackle next. Is it Firestarter?
And next up, Firestarter and then Roadwork. Oh, and then
Okay.
the third one, Danse Macabre.
Oh, and I want to clarify this because I read both versions of The Stand. I will do the same with Dark Tower the Gunslinger. I will not do that with Dance Macabre because Dance Macabre has been rewritten so many times. I'm just going to go with the current version of it, which was made in 2010.
Mhm.
So, not a lot changes.
Isn't it? Did he change the actual text? Because I think he just mostly added like forewords and stuff. Because I remember reading that book and it has like 10 forewords.
Yeah, because
the
every
latest
time he
one.
would just add things because it's
Wi-
nonfiction.
I
It's his
remember
first
reading.
nonfiction.
Yeah, and I remember reading his 2010 forward, the latest one.
Mhm.
He mentions, oh, he's looking forward to watching Zombieland.
So was I in 2010. But anyway, that's all. Have a good one. And we're going to stay on for a minute here. And because we got some more comments, and then we're going to dip off of here.
We have James Bond to do.
Yes, we do, because we're bringing back Live and Let's Discuss. What books did Stephen King write during his drug use, and how do they compare to his work post-drug use? Some of the stuff he did, It, Skeleton Crew. Well, some of Skeleton Crew. I'm not sure how much of when we get to Skeleton Crew, I'll look up what was from like magazines and stuff and what was written for Skeleton Crew. Basically, Cujo infamously, I think Pet Cemetery.
Yeah, wasn't he famously an alcoholic and drug addict throughout like all the 70s and most of the 80s?
He was an alcoholic through the 70s. I don't think the drugs started happening until the 80s.
Okay.
I don't think the coke was a thing till the 80s. Maximum Overdrive, I don't think he remembers making that.
Definitely not.
That was his Creep Show. Would have been during that. I think.
Um, The Talisman, Eyes of the Dragon, most
Yeah.
of his 80s books, actually.
Not until Tommyknockers. Tommyknockers is the sobering book.
Is it?
That
Because
was
I'm
he was always sober writing Tommyknockers.
real,
That was how he got off the addiction and the drinking. That's why that
really.
book is so boring until
Okay.
it's not.
Because I remember it might have been about Tommy Knockers, but I remember about one book he said he wrote it while stuffing like paper in his nose because it kept bleeding from all the cocaine.
Mhm.
I thought it was Tommy Knockers, but maybe it was like he began it when he was a drug addict and then over
It
the
took
course
him
of writing.
years to write Tommyknockers.
Oh, yeah. He mentioned that in the foreword. It was like 6 years.
Yeah.
So
Which
probably it was like him sobering during the writing process.
yeah, but a lot of the 90s stuff kind of lost steam.
Yeah.
Well, the Gunslinger was written before. The Gunslinger was written in the 70s.
Oh, Drawing of the Free.
Drawing of the Three.
That's definitely a druggy
Mhm.
book.
It's about getting clean. But yeah, Wastelands, I think he was sober for that.
Yeah, that was 91.
Yeah. And the 90s stuff is very hit or miss because of that.
Yeah.
It's like he ran out of steam.
Yeah,
I mean,
which he talked about, like he was afraid he was gonna lose his like creative spark.
mhm.
And I mean, the 90s do have some of the all-time greats, I would say. Insomnia, Dolores Claiborne,
Yeah.
Needful Things.
Needful
The Green
Things, I
Mile.
feel like, was a desperate attempt to like get rid of the past. And that's the destruction of Castle Rock, although it really wasn't. The Dark Half, I don't know if that was when he was on drugs or not.
Huh. That was the last of the 80s, I think.
Yeah.
Which
I
I
can't
found.
remember if that's before or after Tommyknockers.
You know what? I have the list here. Let me see. Let me just read this. 1980s. Firestarter. Then Roadwork. Danse Macabre. Cujo. Running Man. Gunslinger. Creepshow. Different Seasons. Christine. I'm gonna guess Christine was written when he was a druggie because I have.
Because that is we talked about the dead zombie as structural mess. Look at Christine.
Yeah, that's gonna be a fun one. Then Pet Cemetery, Cycle of the Werewolf, The Talisman, Finner, Skeleton Crew, It, Eyes of the Dragon, that's 87, Drawing of the Free as well. Misery, 1987. I remember this one. He said that's basically a metaphor for like drug use, and Annie Wilkes is like, the drug, it's forcing him and stuff. Then we got Nightmares in the Sky, and 1989, The Dark Half. Oh no, right after Misery was Tommyknockers. Sorry, I missed that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's all good.
Yeah, so Dark Half probably sober.
Yeah. Dark Half's weird. That feels like he was killing Bachman off.
Oh yeah, that was what it is. The end of Bachman.
Although Bachman comes back.
Twice.
Well, I mean, one was a shelved Bachman book.
Yeah, but still, he returned.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, Regulators, incredible.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of his most creative books.
Absolutely. You would think that was written during his drug time.
Yeah. It's more creative than Desperation.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he also, the 90s is when his feminism phase happened.
Yeah, which is weird because unlike his latest phase with like Sleeping Beauties and Elevation and all that stuff,
Yeah,
and Gwendy, that one, his first wave, so to speak, actually worked. Like
yeah.
Dolores Claiborne, Gerald's Game, Insomnia deals
Girl
with
Who
like
Loves Tom
abortion
Gordon.
and stuff. Girl Who Loves Tom Gordon. Rose Madder
Mm-hmm.
is an underrated one. And that stuff works because it still felt like he was trying to tell a story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But at this point, like the '90s, I feel like is when we really start to weave the Dark Tower together. It really starts with it, and that honestly feels like an afterthought in it.
Yeah.
Most of it feels like an afterthought.
But after it, we get obvious ones: Desperation and The Regulators.
Mhm.
Obviously, two different worlds, literally. Hearts in Atlantis, obviously. Everything's Eventual, the short story collection,
Mhm.
which has two direct Dark Tower stories in it. You know, the titular one and Little Sisters of Illyria.
Which got a comic book adaptation. We
Yeah,
didn't even mention the comic book adaptation of The Stand.
yeah, by Marvel.
Yeah. I didn't bring it up because it's not written by King.
Yeah, but I would say it's decent.
It's fine. It's got great art.
Yeah, art is good. If you don't want to read a over 1,500 page behemoth, you can read the comic adaptation. It's like 6 paperbacks that I have, and it's like really long actually.
Mhm.
And they get most of the stuff in there, so that's nice. And it has a Stephen King cameo at the end.
Oh, there you
Because,
go.
yeah,
All right. Let's move on to Revenished. We're doing good. Doing good. And thank you for yeah, that was long fought. 500 subs. It's weird to think about. Then thoughts on the 1983 film and Cronenberg in general. Solid. I think we said that in the
mhm. I mean, I still have to watch Dead Zone, but I've heard nothing but good things. And I love The Fly. So.
yeah. It's the least gross Cronenberg movie. It's not Videodrome. It's not Scanners, you know. What was it? He did Crash, that movie where people like to have sex with cars. That was Cronenberg, I think. That was 90s Cronenberg. So bizarre. Thundercast Productions. Hello. Yeah. Oh, Lord. We're done with the 70s King. It's weird to think about.
Mhm. Now we get into the 80s. The drug
Which is a
time, the hard
lot.
time. It's his most productive era, maybe?
Well, that Flight of Fear, that's one I don't own. What was that? That was at the tail end of the 80s?
At the end of the 80s, Nightmares in the Sky?
Nightmares. Oh, the Gargoyle book. He hasn't. Oh, yeah, I have that. I gave that to you.
Yeah, in
That's
great
going to be a
condition.
fun one. It's a picture book.
That's gonna be a quick stream.
I mean, it's the same with when we review Creepshow, which when we review Creepshow, we'll talk a lot about the film
Mhm.
because it is the comic's an adaptation of the film. And then we'll talk a little bit about Creepshow 2 and 3, which I don't think you've ever seen 3.
Nope.
It's awful. It has nothing to do with Stephen King. In fact, he
Mhm.
sued. I think they sued because it was an unlicensed sequel. And then we'll
Mm.
talk about the Creepshow show a bit.
Okay.
That's more interesting.
Oh, and we have to talk about the one short story, The Crate. That's in Creepshow 1. He wrote the actual short story. I don't think it's collected in any of his collections.
I'd
It
have to
was in
find it. I've
something
never read
else.
it.
Yeah, me neither. But it's collected in something else.
Why don't you look it up?
Mhm.
Look it up and see.
I'm actually gonna look right now. I know I have it in
Yeah.
a German anthology book, which is nice. I had to buy it specifically because of that short story. Um, okay. Okay, it's a short story from 1979. It was first published in a magazine which shows a half naked lady, obviously.
Oh, was it Playboy?
Uh,
I know he did publish things for Playboy.
yeah, Gallery.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Where was it? Oh, it was published in a Cemetery Dance book in 2016. The Best of Shivers.
I'll have to look that up, see if it has a hardcover.
Yeah, see if you can find it cheap, because I think that's like a premium publisher, so to speak, that does like hardcovers, but
I
it's
hate when he
expensive.
does that.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah,
remember?
I think they are also the only ones who ever released before the play and after the play, which
Which
is
I've never read
prologue.
those
Yeah,
either.
prologue and epilogue to Shining.
Do you remember when I found Riding the Bullet in physical print?
Hmm.
That was expensive. It's a weird size hardcover. That was his first ebook, everyone. Which that he was into that. Because we have to review his anti-gun essay.
Oh, his essay. Oh, oh god.
Because
Okay.
you can still find it.
Hmm. Oh, I know what they removed. They removed two of his ebook short stories that he wrote with Joe Hill, In the Tall Grass and Throttle. They removed them because Joe Hill put them in his latest collection.
Oh. Well, you can still find them then.
Yeah, that's good. Oh, and speaking of which, remember when he wrote the short story which is about the Amazon Kindle, and you can use it to look into different realities?
No.
Yeah, he wrote that as like they asked him like, can you write a short story about our new Amazon Kindle? It was like 2009, and he was like, maybe. And then he wrote a Dark Tower short story called It's collected in Bazaar of Bad Dreams.
Oh, okay. I've never read that.
Yeah, it has the low man as like the beam police, because the guy using the Kindle, looking into different realities, he's threatening the beam for some reason. It's gonna collapse because I think he's trying to change history as well. So yeah, it's a funky story.
Before the low men became protagonists.
Yeah, they became good guys in that story for some reason. Randall Flagg became a good guy in the Gwendy trilogy.
It makes me wonder if he's building to something for the next Dark Tower book.
That would be interesting because
That
I'm
would be
just
smart. I don't know if he is or not. It's so hard to tell with Stephen King these days.
yeah. I mean, I still have to read the final Gwendy book just because I don't want to.
I don't own it. I still don't own it. It's
I
one
mean,
of the
when I have to read all three of them. Gwendy's Button Box, Gwendy's Magic Feather, which he didn't even write, and then Final Task.
which we'll have to talk about Magic Feather though.
Yeah, we have to give it a whole episode because it's part of the trilogy.
Yeah, even
Which
though King has nothing to do with it.
I mean, he wrote the foreword and apparently he gave some ideas, but he didn't actually write parts of it.
Mhm.
I think
Well, he's not credited on the front cover. It's just Richard Chizma.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he's credited on my version because they proudly say with a foreword by Stephen King, and it's gigantic.
Oh yeah, they do on the paperback. I don't know if they do on the hardcover.
Mm-hmm. That's his most bizarre trilogy ever. It's even more bizarre than his Castle Rock trilogy, which is The Dark Half, The Sun Dog, and Needful Things.
Yeah, but there's more Castle Rock. I mean, Gwendy's in Castle Rock.
Yeah, famously, that was one of the big like selling points of the first one. It's like a new novella by Stephen King, and it takes place in Castle Rock in the 70s because Sheriff Bannerman is in it from that song.
Everyone's in the Gwendy books.
Yeah,
Like
Flag is in it.
Hits.
The Dark Tower is in it. Actually, Roland may be in it.
That would be interesting.
I don't want Roland's last appearance be in a fucking Gwendy book.
Well, I really think he will. It's so hard to tell now because Straub died.
Yeah, so we will never get Talisman 3 probably unless they already started work on it or he's gonna finish it on his own.
What I think he would do is he just put Jack in the next Dark Tower book.
Hmm.
Might as well. I mean, Black House just straight up reference is part of the
Yeah.
Dark Tower, even though it's never referenced in the Dark Tower series.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because gotta leave it open for another sequel that they never did, then now it's too late. They started getting ideas in 2016 because I remember them saying like, "Oh yeah, we got together, we talked about it, we already have a plot. We can start working anytime now." And apparently it was something about a serial killer. Because they just talked about they could it was a story about something that had an impact on both of them in the past, and they had like books filled with like news articles about it. Both of them had some event.
What else Straub have you read?
Uh, Julia, and I tried Ghost Story.
Okay, you've never read Floating Dragon?
No, but I know that's his like it version.
It's apparently like the good one.
Hmm.
Like the one that's the one my mom was like, if you're gonna read Straub, just read this one. Because I didn't like Julia.
Hmm.
I will review it at some point, but it was one of the most dated things I've ever read.
Yeah, I mean I agree, but it has some charm to it, even
It
with
was very
being dated.
predictable, though.
Yeah.
Um, it was unpleasant, but
Yeah, but it's speaking of the Dark Tower because now you sparked my interest in this topic. It's so weird how he stopped connecting to it, even though when he has perfect opportunities, or just making connections in general. Something in the last few years changed, where most of his stuff now is referencing Stephen King stuff, like the movie adaptations or books, which he did in the past, but he rarely referenced like events or characters anymore. So
yeah.
Gwendy's final task is like a real change up, bringing in the Dark Tower.
Well, I mean, I'd argue there's a reference in The Outsider
Hmm.
at the very end when they finally are dealing with he's basically the boogeyman. I think as I recall, he references other worlds.
Hmm.
Well, I guess I think King got burnt out because after the wreck, everything was the Dark Tower. I mean, from the Buick 8, it's just the Dark Tower. Black House is the Dark Tower.
Hearts in Atlantis,
Yeah,
everything's eventual. Yeah.
it's all the tower because the tower was the end. And he wrote book 7 and was like, I'm going to keep writing, and wrote Cell.
First he
His
wrote
most
Colorado Kid.
Oh yeah, he did write that's good. Colorado Kid's good. Cell's not good.
Yeah. Just a generic zombie story,
It
but
was
with cell
good at the
phones.
time.
Hmm.
It's it's probably his most dated book, in my opinion.
Hmm. I can see why.
Yeah,
What
it
I
really
like
is.
about Cell, the German cover, I can show it when we get to it, but the German cover has a flip phone, which is just nice.
Mhm. I think the American cover had a Nokia, one of those indestructible Nokia phones.
Hmm.
Uh, that movie's awful. Have you ever seen the?
I've seen clips of it. I knew it came out. It has John Cusack and Samuel L. Jackson,
And
right?
it's the second time the two of them were in a King movie because they were both in 1408.
Yeah, which was a good movie actually.
Yeah, but that's one of the dumber modern King movies. It's
I
so
think he
cheap.
wrote it,
It's
which goes
so
into my thing that he shouldn't write the screenplays.
not always.
Yeah.
Creepshow
Sometimes.
worked.
Yeah. Storm of the
Creep,
Century, I guess, which we have to talk about because he released as a script.
yeah, that'll be interesting to read. But yeah, ugh. I just keep thinking of Sleeping Beauties.
Oh god, yeah, that one. I'm trying to think if that even had connections apart from like being a ripoff of The Stand, and I don't think so.
Well, a lot of he's got really into he did the hard case crime stuff.
Mhm.
He got into like that really realistic.
Yeah, it started with. So he did Colorado Kid right after Dark Tower, a little to start off the hard case crime book line. Okay.
Yeah.
Then he came back for Joyland in 2013.
Uh-huh.
And then 2014 was the start of the Bill Hodges trilogy, Mr. Mercedes, Finders Keepers, End of Watch,
Mhm.
where he tried to do realistic crime stories.
And then End of Watch happened.
Yeah, and then he just said, fuck it, evil Game Boys, mind controlling, teen suicide.
Mhm.
Goldfish, let's go for it.
Yeah. And
And
Holly Gibney, the greatest.
and Holly Gibney. And
His
then he
favorite
said,
character.
and then he said, "Oh man, I like Holly so much. I have an idea for another crime book. Hodge is dead, but I just create a new character." And then we got The Outsider.
Which she's not even in the first half of it.
No, that's why it's so weird. It's just here's another crime story. Okay, but Bill Hodges is dead, so he's just another crime guy. Okay, forget about him. I'm gonna bring in Holly halfway through because I like Holly, and now she's the protagonist. And then
Honestly, it feels like with a lot of his stuff, he wrote himself into a hole with The Outsider, and I feel like Holly was his way of getting out of the hole.
yeah, and then he was like, "I like Holly so much. I bring her back in a straight up sequel to The Outsider, If It Bleeds."
Mhm.
And that story, I've said this before, that's the first time King has just written fan fiction about his own character. Like you can he couldn't give a fuck less about the story or the villain. It's just about here's Holly and here's what she's doing right now, and the plot doesn't really matter, the villain doesn't matter. It's Holly. And speaking of which, that's the title of his next novel. Are you excited? It's coming out this year.
Is that his COVID book?
Maybe. So I
'Cause he
know
was
it's called
talking about writing a COVID book, which no one wants this.
No one. But maybe it is. But apparently the story is about Holly is investigating a weird old couple that lives in a house. And apparently people are disappearing. And so it's another crime one, maybe. Maybe with supernatural stuff. No, I think the synopsis said something about supernatural. Let me I'm gonna get this up right now. Stephen King, Holly. I
What
can't
if you
believe
just write Jericho Hill?
that would be nice. Fairy Tale, he can still write fantasy. I had my problems with Fairy Tale, but it's his
Oh,
most
it's his
fun
best
book.
thing since Revival.
Absolutely, since Revival.
Like, I don't. The Outsider was almost a good book.
Yeah, the first
just-
half of it really good pacing. Very,
Oh, it did. The beginning was one of the most horrific things I've ever read in his books.
Yeah, was good.
That was shocking. That's how I got back into Stephen King. Picked up The Outsider when it came out, and I was like, "Oh, I'll give this a try," because I hadn't read Stephen King in years, and I read that first chapter, and I was physically sick. It's like,
But it's really weird how this spiraled out of control because Mr. Mercedes was supposed to be a short story.
mhm.
Then he said, "Oh, I'm gonna make this a novel." Then he was like, "I'm gonna make this a trilogy." Then he's like, "I like this character, so I'm gonna make a standalone novel that's kind of a sequel because she's in it and she spoils everything that happened in the trilogy. And then I'm gonna make a straight sequel novella to this standalone sequel." And now he's writing Holly, which is a sequel to the novella.
And I get writing what you want to write, but there's
Yeah.
like certain things that he's hinted at that people want, like that short story to The Stand.
Oh yeah, a little epilogue where Franny falls down like a drain or
well.
something. A well.
Yeah, she falls down a well. Well, she's pregnant. Stu has to rescue her.
Yeah, which I think he may have repurposed because he recently talked about a new short story he had written,
Mhm.
Rattlesnakes. He said it's kind of like a sequel to Cujo, and it's about two little girls falling into like a snake pit. Maybe just similar concept,
Hmm.
but speaking of the short stories, I hope that's his next announced book, because typically every 7 years he brings out a new collection, and we have more than enough uncollected short stories as of now.
I thought If It Bleeds came out like 2 years ago.
That's the difference between short story collections and novella
Oh,
collections.
those are novellas. Okay.
Yeah, because novella collections, it's really infrequent when he puts them out, but short stories, it's mostly every 7 years or so. So yeah, Bazaar of Bad Dreams, 2015. So we're gonna hopefully next year. You want me to read the synopsis for Holly, the novel?
Yes. I haven't actually read it yet.
Oh, a great way to end this stream. Looking forward to the next King book. Holly Gibney, one of Stephen King's most compelling and ingeniously resourceful characters, returns in this thrilling novel to solve the gruesome truth behind multiple disappearances in a Midwestern town. Stephen King's Holly marks the triumphant return of beloved King character Holly Gibney. Readers have witnessed Holly's gradual transformation from a shy, but also brave and ethical recluse in Mr. Mercedes to Bill Hodges' partner in Finders Keepers, to a full-fledged, smart, and occasionally tough private detective in The Outsider. No mention of End of Watch. In King's new novel, Holly is on her own and up against a pair of unimaginable, depraved, and brilliantly disguised adversaries. When Penny Dahl calls the Finders Keepers detective agency hoping for help locating her missing daughter, Holly is reluctant to accept the case. Her partner, Pete, has COVID. Okay. Her very complicated mother has just died, and Holly is meant to be on a leave, but something in Penny Dahl's desperate voice makes it impossible for Holly to turn her down. Mere blocks from where Bonnie Dahl disappeared live Professors Rodney and Emily Harris. They are the pictures of bourgeois respectability. I don't know this word.
Like upper aristocracy.
Oh, okay. Married, devoted to each other, and semi-retired lifelong academics, but they are harboring an unholy secret in the basement of their well-kept, book-lined home, one that may be related to Bonnie's disappearance, and it will prove nearly impossible to discover what they are up to. They are savvy, they are patient, and they are ruthless. Holly must summon all her formidable talents to outthink and outmaneuver the shockingly twisted professors in this chilling new masterwork from Stephen King. Okay, so she's gonna fight an elderly married couple and a monster in the basement.
It doesn't sound completely horrible.
It sounds bizarre enough.
It might work. The COVID thing's a bit much. But he's been talking. The reason I brought up the COVID thing, everyone, is that he's been talking about writing something involving COVID-19. I think originally he said he was going to write a history of COVID. Or something like that. I mean, you know how he tweets.
Yeah. I know he said he's going to write a book about it in when did he say it? 2021?
Yeah. I remember we thought it was stupid. It's a stupid idea. And I don't know. Guy's written some good stuff, but sometimes, he leaves me scratching my head.
Yeah. He's getting old. He wants to talk about real life more than ever and stuff.
I mean, he's in his 70s.
Yeah.
He's probably not got very many books left. I just hope he wraps things up.
Yeah, imagine Holly being his last book. That wouldn't be very satisfactory.
Yeah, I could have lived with Fairy Tale being the end.
Honestly, yes, because that was just King saying, "Hey, I would just want to write something nice and fun."
I would love a Dark Tower, a 9th Dark Tower book.
Yeah. Just another spin-off, like Wind Through the Keyhole, just having some fun in this world. That would be.
Or you put the Talisman in there, like third Talisman book.
Or something which he kind of already wanted to do, like a short story collection for Dark Tower. With Wind Through the Keyhole, it was supposed to be just that story, but then it was like, oh, I have to put a Roland in. So he wrote 2 more stories for it and made it a novel. That would also be nice. We already have Little Sisters of Illyria. So.
Yeah. Anyway, I think we got one more comment from Magneto Alex saying congrats on 500 subs. Thank you. I think we're going to wrap it there, but no, and I have another hour of recording, I think.
Yeah. I mean, we're only 2 hours in, so it's good.
Yeah. Anyway, so have a good night, everyone.
Goodbye.
See you later.